The harsh winter wind howled across the fjord, driving snow against the longhouse walls where the clan of Asgeir gathered for the winter solstice feast. Inside, shields adorned with fresh paint hung above smoke-darkened tapestries that depicted the glory of Odin and Thor. The scent of roasting meat and pine boughs filled the air as warriors boasted of their conquests while thralls moved silently among them, refilling drinking horns with mead. Raghnild Asgeirsdottir sat alone at the edge of the celebration, her fingers working a bone needle through a piece of linen as the clan that had once embraced her now turned cold shoulders her way. The whispers followed her like shadows. The Jarl's daughter brings ill fortune. 3 failed betrothals, surely the Norns have cursed her. Even her own father can hardly look upon her now. Once betrothed to the son of a powerful neighboring Jarl, Raghnild had watched him die in a hunting accident before their handfasting. Her second intended husband had fallen ill with fever mere days before their wedding feast. The third had abandoned their arrangement after a Volva had warned him that Raghnild carried the mark of Loki's mischief. Now 20 summers old, Raghnild found herself unwanted, unmarriageable, a burden to her father's household rather than the political asset she was meant to be. The truth she carried in her heart, that she was destined to remain alone, cursed by the gods to bring only sorrow to those who would love her, had become a shield she wore against hope itself. Her father, Jarl Asgeir, a man with hair like steel wool and a beard streaked with grey, rose from his high seat. The hall fell silent as he lifted his drinking horn. The winter grows harsh, but our stores remain full, he declared. Soon enough, the ice will break, and we shall take to our ships once more. The shores of Northumbria await our blades. Warriors pounded their tables and cheered as Raghnild's shoulders tensed. Another raiding season meant more pressure to secure her future, to find some use for a daughter who had failed in her primary duty, to bind their clan through marriage to another powerful family. As the celebration continued, Raghnild slipped away from the feast, wrapping her wool cloak tightly around her shoulders as she stepped into the bitter cold night. The stars glittered like ice above her as she made her way to the shoreline where the frozen fjord stretched before her like polished silver. "The gods mock me," she whispered, her breath clouding before her. "What purpose have they for a woman who cannot fulfill her duty?" The soft crunch of snow behind her made Raghnild turn. Her younger sister, Astrid, approached with a sympathetic smile. "Father asks for you," Astrid said. "The Skalds have begun the old tales." "Let him forget me this night," Raghnild replied. "I bring no honor to his hall." Astrid took her sister's hand. "You are more than a bride price, sister. Your skill with herbs has saved many in our clan. Your weaving tells stories that will outlast us all." Raghnild squeezed her sister's fingers before releasing them. "Go back to the warmth. Tell father I pray at the shore for favorable winds in spring." Alone again, Raghnild closed her eyes and listened to the distant sounds of celebration. This was her fate, to stand apart, to watch others live the life she had been denied. The gods had marked her, and she had accepted their judgment. When spring finally broke winter's grip, Jarl Asgeir's warriors prepared their longships for the season's first raid. Raghnild worked tirelessly, preparing healing herbs and provisions for the journey that would take the men across the sea to foreign shores. On the morning of departure, she stood with the other women at the shoreline, watching as the painted dragon prows of 5 longships faced the open water. Warriors embraced their wives and children, making promises of return with wealth and glory. Her father approached her, his face solemn beneath his helmet. "Daughter," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I have spoken with Jarl Hakon of the northern fjords. His youngest son has agreed to consider you, despite your history." Raghnild felt her throat tighten. "Another attempt to be rid of me, father?" Asgeir's weathered face hardened. "To secure your future, girl? You bring misfortune to this household." Perhaps a fresh start with Hakon's people will change your fate. And if his son dies before our wedding day? Will you still have a daughter to return to?" Her father's hand tightened on his axe hilt. "The gods test us all, Raghnild. When we return from this raid, you will do your duty to this family." Without waiting for her response, he turned and strode toward his waiting ship. Raghnild watched as the longships pulled away from shore, oars dipping in unison into the cold waters. She knew what awaited her father's return: another reluctant groom, another attempt to trade her for alliance, another chance for the curse to claim another life. In the Saxon kingdom of Northumbria, Leif Arvidson stood before King Ethel's court, his height and golden hair marking him clearly as Norse despite the fine Saxon clothing he wore. As prince of a small but prosperous Norse settlement that had made peace with the Saxons years before, Leif served as an emissary between worlds. "The raids will come with the spring tides, my lord," Leif warned the Saxon king. "My scouts report movement along the northern fjords. The Danish jarls grow restless after the long winter." King Ethel stroked his beard, studying the Norseman he had reluctantly come to trust. "And your people? Do they also grow restless for Saxon silver?" Leif met the king's gaze steadily. "My father swore oaths of peace when we settled here 10 winters past. We keep our oaths. Yet you remain Norse in your heart," observed the king. "Blood calls to blood, they say." "I am my father's son," Leif acknowledged. "But I have seen enough bloodshed. Our settlement thrives through trade, not raiding." For Leif, this truth had been hard-won. Raised in the old ways, he had once believed that only through combat could a man prove his worth to the gods. Only through conquest could his people survive. But years of living alongside Saxons, of learning their language and customs, had shown him another path, one where peace brought greater prosperity than war. Yet a part of him remained divided, caught between the Saxon world where he now moved freely and the Norse traditions that still sang in his blood. His father, Jarl Arvid the Peacemaker, had taught him that a wise ruler finds strength in alliance rather than conquest. But many among their own people viewed such wisdom as weakness, a betrayal of the old ways. As he departed the king's hall, Leif paused to gaze northward, toward the sea where his ancestors had once sailed in search of glory. The Saxon settlement they had built lay peaceful in the valley below, but for how long? Every spring brought new raids, new violence, and each time, suspicion fell upon Leif's people, despite their oaths. "You seem troubled, my friend," said Edric, a Saxon thegn who had become one of Leif's closest allies. "The raiders will come again," Leif replied. "And again, we will be caught between worlds, too Norse for the Saxons, too peaceful for the raiders." Edric clapped him on the shoulder. "Then we will fight together, as we have before." But Leif knew the deeper truth he could not share with his Saxon friend. With each passing year, the bonds that held their settlement to their Norse heritage grew weaker. The younger generation spoke more Saxon than Norse. They worshipped in Christian churches rather than honoring the old gods. Soon, perhaps within his lifetime, they would no longer be Norse at all, and something essential would be lost forever. This was the burden he carried, to preserve what was worthy in the old ways while embracing the peace his father had won. To remember who they were, even as they became something new. The attack came with the dawn, just as Leif had warned. 3 longships appeared on the horizon, their painted shields gleaming in the early light. Saxon alarm bells rang across the countryside as farmers abandoned their fields and fled toward the walled town. Leif donned his father's mail shirt and strapped on his sword, a blade forged in the Norse tradition but bearing Saxon patterns hammered into its hilt. He led 50 warriors, a mix of Norse settlers and Saxons who had trained together, to meet the raiders at the shore. The battle was brief but fierce. These were not Danish raiders from the east but Norse from the northern fjords, warriors who fought with the ferocity of men who had endured a hungry winter. Leif recognized the markings on their shields, the clan of Asgeir, known for their skilled fighters and proud lineage. As the raiders retreated to their ships, leaving their dead behind, Leif's men pursued them to the shallows. In the chaos, an arrow struck Leif's shoulder, driving him to one knee in the surf. A Norse raider, separated from his companions, charged toward him with axe raised high. Leif braced himself for the blow, his wounded arm too weak to raise his shield, when another raider shouted something and drove a spear haft across his companion's chest, knocking him sideways. "Enough," the intervening raider shouted in Norse. "Back to the ships!" In the moment before they retreated, Leif locked eyes with the warrior who had saved him, not a man but a woman, her face partially concealed by a leather helm, her blue eyes fierce beneath it. She held his gaze for just a heartbeat before turning to help her fallen comrade to the retreating longship. That night, as a Saxon healer tended his wound, Leif could not forget those eyes or the unexpected mercy shown by a raider. It contradicted everything he believed about the brutal warriors from the north, those who rejected the path of settlement and peace his father had chosen. "The wound will heal clean," the healer assured him. "You were fortunate." Fortunate indeed, Leif thought, though not in the way the healer meant. Something about that brief encounter had stirred a recognition in him, as if the Norns themselves had woven a strand of fate between him and the shield maiden with the winter-blue eyes. Raghnild crouched low in the longship as they retreated from the Saxon shore, her heart pounding beneath her borrowed mail shirt. She had never intended to join the raid, had only boarded her father's ship at the last moment, disguised as a young warrior, determined to prove to herself and the gods that she was more than a cursed bride, more than a burden to be traded for alliance. But the battle had shaken her. She had never killed before, had never truly understood what it meant to raid until she saw the terror in the eyes of Saxon farmers fleeing their homes. And then, at the crucial moment, she had betrayed her own people by preventing Gunnar from killing the fallen Saxon leader. Except he wasn't Saxon at all. She had heard him shouting orders in perfect Norse, had recognized in his face and bearing the unmistakable signs of her own people. A Norse warrior leading Saxons against Norse raiders? The contradiction plagued her as their ships put distance between themselves and the shore. Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Jarl Asgeir stood over her, his expression thunderous as he reached down and yanked the helmet from her head, allowing her long auburn hair to fall free. "By Odin's eye, have you lost your mind, girl?" The other warriors turned to stare, some in shock, others in growing anger. Raghnild rose to her feet, refusing to cower. "I fought well," she said, meeting her father's gaze. "I took no wounds and gave none." "You gave none?" Gunnar spat from across the ship. "She stopped me from finishing that Saxon dog who led them." Jarl Asgeir's face darkened further. "Is this true?" Raghnild straightened her shoulders. "He was Norse, not Saxon. I heard his voice. Saw his face. He is one of our own." "A traitor, then," her father growled. "All the more reason to have ended him." "We were retreating," she argued. There was no honor in striking a wounded man who had fought bravely. Her father seized her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Honor? What do you know of a warrior's honor? You, who hid among men, who disobeyed your Jarl, who betrayed your own people." The ship fell silent, all eyes upon them. Raghnild knew that by the old laws, her father had every right to punish her severely, even to cast her from the clan entirely. "When we return home," Jarl Asgeir said, his voice low and dangerous, "you will be sent immediately to Jarl Hakon's son. Perhaps he can tame what I clearly cannot." That night, as the longships anchored in a hidden cove to rest before continuing their journey home, Raghnild sat apart from the others. The men had given her a wide berth since her father's pronouncement, as if her disgrace might be catching. Only her cousin Eric dared approach, offering her a portion of bread and dried meat. "You should eat," he said quietly. "The journey home will be long." "And what awaits me there?" she asked bitterly. "Another unwanted marriage? Another chance for the gods to prove I am cursed?" Eric glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "The warrior you saved, I've heard tales of Norse who settled in Saxon lands during our father's time. Some say there is a Norse prince who rules there with his father, a jarl who made peace with the Saxon king." Raghnild considered this. A Norse prince who fights alongside Saxons against his own kind. The world changes, cousin. Perhaps he found honor in a different path. Honor in a different path. The words echoed in Raghnild's mind long after Eric had left her side. What honor awaited her at home? A forced marriage to a man who would take her only for political gain, who would resent the curse that seemed to follow her. Or worse, another dead betrothed and more proof of her ill fortune? As the night deepened and the camp grew quiet, Raghnild made her decision. Taking only her knife, a small bag of provisions, and the cloak from her shoulders, she slipped over the side of the ship and swam silently to shore. The journey ahead would be dangerous, a lone Norse woman in Saxon territory, but for the first time in years, she felt the weight of fate lifting from her shoulders. She would forge her own path, as the Norse prince had done. She would find a way to live that did not require her to be merely a daughter to be traded or a curse to be feared. She would find her own honor. For 3 days, Leif's wound kept him from joining the patrols that scoured the countryside for signs of further raiding parties. The arrow had cut deeper than the healer initially thought, and fever had set in briefly, bringing with it dreams of blue eyes in a warrior's face and the strange sense of recognition he had felt in that moment on the shore. On the 4th day, he insisted on riding out despite the healer's protests. The coastal villages needed reassurance, and his presence, a Norse leader who stood against raiders, helped calm Saxon fears that might otherwise turn against his own settlement. He was returning through the forest when he spotted smoke rising from a small clearing, too small for a raiding party, but any fire in these woods warranted investigation. Signaling his companions to approach cautiously, Leif drew his sword and advanced through the trees. What he found was not raiders but a solitary figure huddled beside a small fire, a woman in travel-stained clothing, her auburn hair partially covered by a hood. She looked up at their approach, and Leif found himself staring into the same blue eyes that had haunted his dreams. "You," he said in Norse, lowering his sword. She rose in one fluid motion, a knife appearing in her hand, her stance that of a trained warrior despite her lack of armor. "Have you come to finish what your Saxon friends began?" she asked, her voice steady despite being outnumbered. Leif sheathed his sword and motioned for his men to lower their weapons. "I've come to investigate smoke in my territory," he replied, still speaking Norse. "But I believe I owe you a life debt, Shield Maiden." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "The Norse who fights for Saxons," she said. "They said you might be a prince." "Leif Arvidson," he confirmed with a slight bow. "Son of Jarl Arvid the Peacemaker. And you are far from your raiding party, warrior woman." A flash of something, pain, defiance, crossed her face. "I no longer sail with them." Leif studied her more carefully. Though she held herself like a fighter, there was something in her bearing that spoke of noble birth, the daughter of a jarl, perhaps, rather than a common shield maiden. Her knife, too, bore silver inlay work that only wealth could provide. "My men and I mean you no harm," he said, switching to Saxon for the benefit of his companions. "She is alone and poses no threat. Give us a moment." His men retreated a respectful distance, though they kept watchful eyes on the Norse woman. Leif approached her fire and gestured to a place beside it. Will you share your fire with the man whose life you spared? After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, though she kept her knife close at hand as he Saturday. I am Raghnild Asgeirsdottir, she said finally. Daughter of Jarl Asgeir of the northern fjords. A Jarl's daughter, Leif said, confirming his suspicion. Far from home and alone in Saxon lands. This is no raiding strategy I've encountered before. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. No strategy. Only escape. From what do you flee, Raghnild Asgeirsdottir? Your father's enemies. My father's plans, she corrected. An unwanted marriage. A life as nothing more than coin to be traded for alliance. Leif nodded slowly. He had seen such arrangements among both Norse and Saxons, daughters and sons whose lives were determined by political necessity rather than their own desires. And you chose exile instead, he said. It wasn't a question. I chose freedom, she replied, her eyes meeting his with unflinching directness. Even if it lasts only until your Saxon friends decide my life is forfeit for the raid I joined. The raid where you saved a Norse stranger at risk to yourself, Leif reminded her. Why did you do that? Ragnhild's gaze dropped to the small fire between them. I don't know, she admitted. Perhaps because you fought with honor. Perhaps because I recognized something in you. She looked up again, her expression challenging. Or perhaps I simply tired of seeing blood spilled. Something stirred in Leif's chest, a recognition of the same conflict he himself had faced years ago, when he had chosen to embrace his father's path of peace rather than the traditional glory of raiding. My settlement lies a half-day's ride from here, he said. Norse and Saxon living together in peace. You would find safety there while you decide your next path. Suspicion narrowed her eyes. Why would you offer shelter to one who came with raiders against your people? Because I, too, once had to choose between the old ways and a new path, Leif said simply. And because I believe the gods put you in my path twice now for a reason. The Norse settlement surprised Raghnild. She had expected a small outpost, perhaps a few longhouses surrounded by a crude palisade. Instead, she found a prosperous town where Norse longhouses stood alongside Saxon-style buildings, where Christian crosses and Thor's hammers hung side by side over doorways, where children played together speaking a mixture of both tongues. Leif had brought her to his father's hall, a longhouse built in the traditional style but adorned with Saxon tapestries alongside Norse carvings. There, Jarl Arvid, an imposing man with a silver-streaked beard and keen eyes that missed nothing, had listened to his son's account of finding her in the forest. So, the old Jarl said when Leif had finished, studying Raghnild with an intensity that reminded her of her own father, Asgeir's daughter. I knew your father in my younger days. A proud man. Stubborn in the old ways. He is unchanged, Raghnild confirmed. And now his daughter flees an arranged marriage to find herself in the hands of those he would call traitors to the Norse way, Arvid observed, though there was no malice in his tone. The Norns weave strange patterns. I did not know where else to go, she admitted. I only knew I could not return. The old Jarl exchanged a glance with his son. You may remain here for now, daughter of Asgeir. But understand this, we have built peace here over many years. If your presence threatens that peace, if your father brings war to our shores seeking you, I will leave before I bring harm to your people, Raghnild promised. I have seen enough of blood feuds and vengeance. Arvid's stern expression softened slightly. Then perhaps you have more in common with us than you yet realize. He turned to Leif. Show her to Ingrid's house. The healer can use an extra pair of hands, and it will give our guest purpose while she decides her path. In the days that followed, Raghnild found herself slowly integrated into the life of the settlement. The healer Ingrid, a formidable Norse woman who had married a Saxon herbalist, put Ragnhild's knowledge of healing plants to good use. Though some of the Saxons regarded her with suspicion at first, her willingness to work alongside them and her skill with medicines gradually earned their grudging respect. Leif visited often, his shoulder healing well despite the depth of his wound. He brought her news of the outside world, of patrols that found no further sign of raiders, of the Saxon king's preparations should more attacks come. Sometimes he simply sat with her as she sorted herbs in Ingrid's garden, telling her stories of how his father had established peace with the Saxons, of the challenges they had faced and overcome. "Your father is a rare man," Raghnild observed one evening as they walked along the settlement's edge, the spring twilight painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "To turn from the old ways so completely." "He did not turn from them entirely," Leif corrected. "He kept what was worthy, our craftsmanship, our songs, our respect for strength and courage. But he saw that there were different kinds of strength than those celebrated in the mead halls." Raghnild thought of her father, of his unyielding adherence to tradition, his determination to use her as a political tool regardless of the pattern of misfortune that followed her betrothals. "My father would say your father betrayed our gods and our ancestors," she said quietly. Leif stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "And what do you say, Raghnild Asgeirsdottir?" She considered the question carefully. "I say that I have found more honor in this place, where former enemies break bread together, than I ever found in my father's hall, where glory was measured only in silver taken and blood spilled." Something changed in Leif's eyes then, a softening, a recognition. For a moment, it seemed he might speak further, might reach for her hand. Instead, he merely nodded and resumed their walk, though something had shifted between them, some barrier lowered. That night, alone in the small chamber Ingrid had provided her, Raghnild found herself thinking of Leif, of his quiet strength, so different from the boastful warriors of her father's hall, of the way he moved between Norse and Saxon worlds with grace, of the respect his people showed him not out of fear but genuine loyalty. For the first time since she could remember, Raghnild felt the stirrings of something she had long ago abandoned, hope. Not just for survival, not just for escape, but for a life with purpose and perhaps, though she scarcely dared think it, with love. But with that hope came fear. The curse that had followed her betrothal had not vanished simply because she had fled her father's hall. And Leif, for all his kindness, remained a Jarl's son. His path would inevitably include a political marriage, just as hers had been planned to be. Some fates, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, could not be outrun, no matter how far one fled. As spring deepened into summer, Leif found himself increasingly drawn to Raghnild's company. She had integrated herself into the settlement with remarkable adaptability, earning respect not through her birth but through her skills and willingness to work alongside others. The Saxon women who had initially viewed her with suspicion now sought her healing knowledge, the Norse children delighted in her stories of the old gods, told with a vividness that kept the ancient traditions alive. And Leif? Leif found himself inventing reasons to seek her out. He brought her interesting plants for her healing work, shared meals with her in his father's hall, sought her counsel on matters where Norse and Saxon customs differed. Each conversation revealed new depths to her, intelligence, compassion, quiet strength, and a wry humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable in her new home. "You watch her like a man dying of thirst eyes a spring," observed his father one evening as they sat together in the hall, watching Raghnild teach a group of children, Norse and Saxon alike, to weave simple protection charms from straw. "She is remarkable," Leif admitted, not bothering to deny his father's observation. "She is Asgeir's daughter," Arvid reminded him, his tone cautious. "Her father is one of the most powerful Jarls in the north, and one of the most committed to the old ways of raiding. If he discovers she is here..." "He cast her out," Leif said. "Forced her to flee rather than submit to his will." And you believe he will simply forget she exists? A Jarl's daughter is valuable, Leif. He will search for her, if only to save face among the other Jarls. Leif knew his father spoke truly. Jarl Asgeir's pride would not allow him to simply accept his daughter's disappearance. Sooner or later, word would reach him of a Norse woman matching Ragnhild's description living among the traitor settlement. I would protect her, Leif said simply. His father's weathered face softened. I know you would, my son. But consider carefully the path you contemplate. Our peace with the Saxons remains fragile. King Ethel tolerates us because we have proven our loyalty, because we stand as a buffer against raiders like Asgeir. If we harbor the daughter he seeks, so we should return her to a fate she fled? To a man who values her only as a pawn in his games of alliance? Arvid shook his head. I did not say that. I only ask that you consider all that may come to pass, not just what your heart desires. Later that night, unable to sleep, Leif walked to the settlement's edge where a small shrine to the old god stood alongside the Christian church. Few still made offerings here, but Leif occasionally found comfort in the connection to his ancestors. To his surprise, Raghnild knelt before the carved figure of Freya, goddess of love and war, placing a small bundle of summer flowers at its base. I did not expect to find you here, he said softly, not wishing to startle her. She looked up, unsurprised by his presence, as if she had sensed his approach. I come often, she admitted. The Christian god may protect this settlement now, but it is Freya who guides my heart. Leif knelt beside her, noticing the intricate design of the flowers she had arranged, a pattern he recognized from the protection charms Norse mothers wove for their children. You seek the goddess's protection? He asked. Raghnild was quiet for a long moment. I seek her wisdom, she finally said. There is a shadow that follows me, Leif. A curse, some would say. 3 men who agreed to marry me met with misfortune before our handfasting. Death, illness, fear of prophecy, each time, the match was broken. And you believe yourself cursed? I believed it once, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was easier to believe in a curse than to hope for something different. Easier to accept that the gods had marked me than to fight against my father's will. And now? Leif asked, acutely aware of how close they sat, of the scent of herbs that clung to her hair, of the vulnerability she showed him that she revealed to no others. Now I wonder if the curse was not in me but in the path I was forced to walk, she said, turning to face him fully. If the gods did not break those betrothals to lead me to a different fate. The moonlight silvered her features, making her appear almost as one of the goddesses from the old tales. Leif reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. What fate do you see now, Raghnild Asgeirsdottir? Her eyes, reflecting starlight, held his. One I never dared to imagine in my father's hall, she whispered. One where I am valued for more than alliances I can secure. Where I am free to choose my own path. My own heart. Leif's hand slid to cup the back of her neck, drawing her closer until their foreheads touched. And what does your heart choose? Instead of answering with words, Raghnild closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that spoke more clearly than any oath or promise. Leif pulled her against him, feeling the rightness of her in his arms, as if the Norns had indeed woven their threads together long before they met on that battlefield. When they finally parted, breathless, Leif kept her close, unwilling to break the spell of the moment. My father warns me that your father will not have forgotten you, he said softly. That he may yet seek you out. I know, she replied. I have lived with that fear since I fled. But I will not let fear of what may come rob me of what is before me now. Nor will I, Leif promised, sealing his words with another kiss beneath the watching eyes of the old gods and the new stars. As summer reached its height, the settlement held its traditional midsummer feast, a celebration that blended Norse and Saxon customs into something unique to their community. Great fires were lit, music played, and for one night, the concerns of survival and safety were set aside in favor of joy and abundance. Raghnild, now accepted as one of their own, had spent days helping prepare special breads and mead for the occasion. She wore a gown borrowed from Ingrid's daughter, Saxon in cut but embroidered with Norse patterns, and had woven fresh flowers into her auburn hair. Leif found her irresistible. In the month since she had arrived, their growing love had become something of an open secret in the settlement. They had made no formal announcements, but Leif no longer tried to hide his affection, nor did Raghnild pretend indifference when he entered a room. As the celebration reached its peak, Jarl Arvid called for silence, raising his drinking horn high. "Tonight we celebrate not only midsummer," he announced, "but 20 years of peace between Norse and Saxon in this place. 20 years of building something new from the wisdom of the old." Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Leif, standing at his father's right hand, felt pride swell in his chest. This was his inheritance, not just land and title, but this hard-won peace, this community that had found strength in unity rather than conquest. "And now," Arvid continued when the cheers subsided, "my son wishes to speak." Leif stepped forward, his heart pounding as he sought Ragnhild's eyes in the crowd. Finding her, he drew strength from her smile. "For 20 years, we have shown that the old hatred between Norse and Saxon need not define our future," he began. "That we can take the best of both peoples and forge something stronger than either alone." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. "Tonight, I wish to honor that tradition in a new way," Leif continued. "Raghnild Asgeirsdottir, daughter of the North, healer and warrior, woman of both courage and compassion, will you join me?" A path cleared as Raghnild made her way to stand before him, her cheeks flushed but her eyes steady. "Raghnild," Leif said, loud enough for all to hear, "before these witnesses, before the old gods and the new, I ask you to join your life with mine. To stand beside me as we lead this settlement into the future. To be my wife in the eyes of all." A hush fell over the gathering. All knew that Leif, as son of the Jarl, might have been expected to make a political match, perhaps with a Saxon noble's daughter to strengthen their alliance with King Ethelred, or with a daughter of another Norse settlement to expand their influence. Ragnhild's eyes shone with unshed tears as she took Leif's outstretched hands. "I, who once fled from a marriage not of my choosing, now freely choose this one," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will stand beside you, Leif Arvidson, as your wife and your equal, before all gods and all peoples." Jarl Arvid stepped forward, his expression solemn though Leif could see the approval in his father's eyes. "Then let the hand-fasting be prepared," he declared. "At the harvest moon, these two shall be joined according to our ways." Cheers erupted once more as Leif pulled Raghnild into his arms, spinning her in a circle of joy before kissing her soundly, heedless of the watching crowd. For this moment, at least, the future seemed bright with promise, unclouded by the shadows of the past. But fate, as the Norse well knew, was seldom so simple. The harvest moon approached, and with it, preparations for the hand-fasting intensified. According to tradition, both Norse and Saxon customs would be honored in the ceremony. Raghnild worked alongside the women of the settlement to prepare her wedding clothes, a gown that combined elements of both cultures, just as she and Leif's union would. Her happiness in these days felt almost frightening in its intensity. After years of believing herself cursed, of accepting that she would never know love, to find herself not only loved but celebrated for who she truly was seemed almost too much good fortune to trust. "You look like a woman expecting the sky to fall," Ingrid observed one afternoon as they worked together sorting dried herbs for the winter stores. "Surely planning a wedding cannot be so grim a task." Raghnild managed a smile. "Not grim. Just I sometimes fear this happiness cannot last." The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. "You still fear this curse you believe follows you." "3 betrothals, 3 misfortunes," Raghnild said quietly. "Perhaps the gods truly do not wish me to marry." Ingrid set aside her work and took Ragnhild's hands in her weathered ones. "Listen to me, child. I have seen many so-called curses in my time as a healer. Most are nothing more than fear and ill chance given power by our belief in them. But if Leif is strong, healthy, and protected by the love of his people, both Norse and Saxon," Ingrid interrupted firmly. "And more importantly, he chooses you freely, with full knowledge of your past. That is a different kind of magic than any curse could overcome." Raghnild wanted desperately to believe her. And most days, surrounded by the genuine affection of her new community and Leif's unwavering love, she did. But in quiet moments, doubt crept in like mist from the sea. Her fears seemed justified when, a week before the planned handfasting, a Saxon messenger arrived from King Ethel's court, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Raiders," the man reported grimly to Jarl Arvid's council, where both Leif and Raghnild sat among the settlement's leaders. 3 ships spotted off the northern coast, moving south toward our territories. The king asks for your warriors to join the defense, as agreed in your treaty." 3 ships? Leif asked sharply. "Can you describe their markings?" The messenger nodded. "Red shields bearing black ravens. The lead ship flew a banner with a wolf's head." Raghnild felt the blood drain from her face. "My father's ships," she whispered, too quietly for any but Leif to hear. Jarl Arvid, who had also recognized the description, glanced briefly at Raghnild before addressing the council. "We will honor our treaty with King Ethelred. Leif will lead 30 warriors to join the Saxon Fyrd. The rest will remain to protect our settlement." As the council dispersed to prepare, Leif pulled Raghnild into a quiet alcove. "Your father comes," he said without preamble. "The question is whether he comes for you or merely to raid." "He comes for me," Raghnild said with certainty. "The wolf banner flies only when he leads a personal mission, a blood feud or a matter of family honor. He would not display it for a simple raid." Leif's expression hardened. "Then he will find you protected by those who value you for more than the alliances you can secure." Raghnild placed her hand against his cheek. "You cannot fight my father, Leif. He is one of the most feared warriors in the northern fjords, and he will bring his best men. This is not a battle you can win." "Would you have me surrender you, then?" he asked, covering her hand with his own. "Return you to a man who would force you into marriage against your will?" "No," she said firmly. "But neither would I have you die in a battle that need not be fought." An idea formed in her mind, dangerous, perhaps even foolish, but possibly their only chance to avoid bloodshed. "Let me speak with him." Leif's eyes widened. "You cannot be serious." "He may punish you for fleeing, he is still bound by the laws of our people," Raghnild reminded him. "I have committed no crime worthy of death or serious punishment. I am of age to choose my own path if no formal betrothal has been finalized. And I know him, Leif. I know how to speak to him in ways your warriors cannot." "It is too dangerous," Leif insisted. "I will not risk losing you." "And I will not risk losing you to my father's axe," she countered. "Trust me, Leif. Trust that I know what I am doing." For a long moment, he searched her face, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I will arrange an envoy under a flag of truce. But I will be at your side. That is not negotiable." Raghnild knew this was the most concession she would win from him. "Together, then," she agreed. "As we have been since you found me in the forest." as we shall be after the hand-fasting." Leif pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Nothing will prevent our hand-fasting," he promised against her hair. "Not raiders, not jarls, not even the gods themselves." Raghnild held him tightly, praying his words would not prove to be a challenge the Norns would eagerly accept. The meeting place was neutral ground, a stretch of shoreline midway between where Jarl Asgeir's ships had landed and the settlement. Leif arrived with Raghnild and a small honor guard of both Norse and Saxon warriors, all under a white flag of truce. They did not wait long before Jarl Asgeir appeared with his own men, his scarred face set in grim lines beneath his helmet. Raghnild felt a complex mix of emotions at the sight of her father: fear, anger, a daughter's instinctive love despite everything, and underneath it all, a new strength born from the months of freedom she had tasted. "So," Jarl Asgeir said as he approached, his cold eyes moving from Raghnild to Leif, "this is where my daughter fled. To the son of Arvid the Oathbreaker." "The peacemaker," Leif corrected calmly, though Raghnild could feel the tension in him. "And yes, Raghnild has found sanctuary among people who value her for her skills and her heart, not merely for the alliances her marriage might bring." Asgeir's mouth twisted in a sneer. Pretty words from a man who has forgotten what it means to be Norse. "Tell me, daughter, have you abandoned our gods as well as your duty to your family?" Raghnild stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Leif rather than behind him, a position that did not go unnoticed by her father. "I have abandoned nothing of value," she replied steadily. "I still honor the gods. I still respect our traditions. But I will not be treated as property to be traded, father. Not anymore. You have duties. I have fulfilled my duties to our family for 20 years, she interrupted, something she would never have dared before her flight. I tended our sick, I wove our cloth, I prepared for 3 betrothals that all ended in misfortune. The gods themselves seem to reject the path you chose for me." Asgeir's face darkened. "You speak of the gods?" "The gods demand obedience from children to their fathers. They demand that oaths be kept. I had given my word to Hakon that you would wed his son, a son who agreed only because you offered a bride price so high he could not refuse," Raghnild countered. "A man who has never met me, who knows nothing of me save the rumors of a curse that follows my betrothals." "Enough!" Asgeir's voice thundered across the shore. "You will return with me now, Raghnild. This discussion is finished." Leif moved slightly, positioning himself more protectively beside Raghnild. "She is no longer yours to command, Jarl Asgeir. Raghnild has chosen her own path, and that path includes becoming my wife at the next full moon." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Raghnild watched her father's face as he processed this information, saw the calculations behind his eyes. Finally, he barked a harsh laugh. "So that's how it is. You steal my daughter and think to make her your bride." His eyes narrowed as he studied Leif more carefully. "Does your father know you court death so eagerly, boy?" "My father knows I have chosen a woman of courage, wisdom, and skill to stand beside me as we lead our people," Leif replied evenly. "He has given his blessing to our union." "And what of her curse?" Asgeir asked with malicious pleasure. 3 men agreed to marry her. 1 died. 1 fell deathly ill. 1 fled after the Volva warned him of misfortune. "Do you not fear the god's judgment, Leif Arvidson?" Before Leif could answer, Raghnild spoke, her voice clear and confident. "There is no curse, father. Only the god's wisdom in preventing me from walking a path that was not meant for me. I was not meant for political marriage to men who saw me only as a jarl's daughter. I was meant for this place, this community, this man who sees me truly." Asgeir studied his daughter as if seeing her for the first time, the confidence in her bearing, the certainty in her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, though his voice remained hard when he spoke again. "You claim to still honor our ways, Raghnild. Then you will recognize this: I challenge your intended husband to Holmgang. If he truly believes the gods favor your union, let him prove it with steel." Ragnhild's heart froze. Holmgang, the traditional Norse duel to settle disputes, was fought to first blood or death, depending on the terms. And her father, despite his years, remained one of the most feared warriors in the north. "Father, this is madness, I accept," Leif said firmly. "Tomorrow at midday. Here on this shore." "Leif, no," Ragnhild began, but he silenced her with a gentle touch to her arm. "This is our way," he said quietly. "And your father is right about one thing: if I am to claim you as my bride, I must be willing to fight for that right according to Norse law." Asgeir nodded, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. "Tomorrow, then. And when you lie bleeding on the sand, my daughter will return to her rightful place in my household, to fulfill the duties she has neglected for too long." As her father and his men departed, Ragnhild turned to Leif in anguish. "You cannot do this," she insisted. "My father has fought in dozens of Holmgangs. He has never lost." Leif took her hands in his expression serene despite the mortal challenge he had just accepted. "Then tomorrow will be a day of firsts," he said. "The first time your father loses a Holmgang. And the first day of our life together without his shadow hanging over us." Ragnhild wished she could share his confidence. But as they returned to the settlement to bring news of the coming duel, all she could think of was that the curse she had feared had found a new and terrible form, not preventing her marriage through misfortune to her betrothed, but through challenging the only man she had ever truly loved to a fight he might not survive. News of the Holmgang spread quickly through the settlement. Jarl Arvid, though concerned, did not attempt to dissuade his son from the path he had chosen. "You were right to accept," the old Jarl told Leif as they shared a private meal that evening. "To refuse would be to lose all standing among those who still honor the old ways. And we need their respect, even as we forge new traditions." "I did not accept for politics," Leif said. "I accepted because it is the only way to free Ragnhild from her father's control once and for all." Arvid studied his son thoughtfully. "You truly love her." "With all that I am," Leif confirmed. "Then fight tomorrow not with anger or fear, but with that love," his father advised. "Asgeir fights for pride and control. You fight for something far stronger." While Leif prepared with his father and the settlement's weapons master, Ragnhild sought wisdom in another quarter. She found Ingrid in the small shrine to the old gods, making offerings of her own. "You seek to prevent tomorrow's fight," the healer observed without turning as Ragnhild approached. "I seek to ensure Leif survives it," Ragnhild corrected. "My father will not yield easily, if at all." Ingrid turned, a small bundle of herbs in her weathered hands. "There are no potions that can guarantee victory in Holmgang," she said, correctly interpreting Ragnhild's unspoken question. "The old gods decree that such contests reveal their will through the strength and skill of the combatants." "Then what hope is there?" Ragnhild asked, despair creeping into her voice. "My father has fought since before Leif was born. He has killed men in Holmgang for lesser insults than taking his daughter without permission." The old healer's eyes softened. "Come," she said, leading Ragnhild deeper into the shrine. There, in the flickering light of oil lamps, stood a small statue of Freya, the same goddess to whom Ragnhild had prayed with Leif. "The gods of love and war are one and the same for our people," Ingrid said softly. "Freya, who governs the heart, also selects half the slain in battle. She understands that to love deeply is also to fight fiercely for what matters." "What would you have me do?" "Pray," the healer said simply. "Not for victory or defeat, but for truth to be revealed. for the outcome that best serves love itself. And then, before the fight tomorrow, give Leif this." She pressed the bundle of herbs into Raghnild's hand. Not a charm or a spell, but a reminder that he fights not just for honor or tradition, but for love. Raghnild remained in the shrine long after Ingrid departed, kneeling before Freya's image as she had done with Leif that night when they had first acknowledged their feelings. She prayed not with the desperate pleas of a fearful girl but with the steady determination of a woman who had found her strength. "Goddess of love and war," she whispered, "guide his hand tomorrow. Not for my sake, but for the sake of what we might build together, a bridge between old ways and new, between peoples too long divided by hatred. Let truth prevail in tomorrow's homegang, whatever that truth may be." When she finally returned to her chamber, she found Leif waiting. Without words, he opened his arms, and she went to him, feeling the solid strength of him against her, memorizing the contours of his body, the rhythm of his heartbeat, the scent of his skin. "I will not lose you," he murmured against her hair. "Not to your father, not to the past, not to any curse real or imagined." Raghnild tilted her face up to his. "Promise me you will not underestimate him. Promise me you will fight with all your skill." "I promise," he said, sealing his words with a kiss that spoke of all they stood to lose, and all they stood to gain. The beach lay silent under the midday sun, the tide retreating to reveal a stretch of firm sand where the homegang would take place. As was tradition, for hazel poles marked the designated fighting area, with hides stretched on the ground to establish firm footing. Leif arrived with his father and his chosen seconds, trusted warriors from the settlement. He wore simple fighting clothes, his sword at his side, his shield bearing the emblem of his father's house, a ship beneath a star, symbolizing the journey that had brought them to this place of new beginnings. Raghnild stood slightly apart, dressed in a gown of deep blue that matched her eyes, her auburn hair braided with silver threads in the Norse tradition. Around her neck hung a small pouch containing the herbs Ingrid had given her, rosemary for remembrance, oak leaves for strength, and flowers from Freya's sacred meadows for protection. Jarl Asgeir and his men approached from the opposite direction, the Jarl's scarred face set in grim lines beneath his helmet. Unlike Leif, he wore partial armor, a concession to his age, perhaps, though still impressively muscled for a man of his years. The terms of the homegang were simple: the fight would continue until one man yielded, was driven from the marked area, or could no longer defend himself. Death was not required but was not prohibited, a fact that made Raghnild's heart clench with fear despite her faith in Leif's skill. As tradition demanded, before the fight could begin, each man stated his claim. "I am Jarl Asgeir of the northern fjords," her father declared, his voice carrying across the silent beach. "I fight to reclaim my daughter, wrongfully taken from my household, and to defend the honor of my name against those who would steal what is rightfully mine." Leif stepped forward, his stance relaxed yet alert, his eyes clear and focused. "I am Leif Arvidson, son of Jarl Arvid the Peacemaker. I fight for Raghnild's right to choose her own path, to live among those who value her true worth, and to become my wife with the blessing of gods old and new." A ripple went through the watching crowd at the simplicity and clarity of his statement. Even some of Asgeir's men exchanged glances, perhaps recognizing the justice in Leif's claim. Raghnild stepped forward then, though this was not strictly part of the tradition. All eyes turned to her as she moved to stand between the two men, not within the marked fighting area but close enough that both could clearly hear her words. "Before this fight begins," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiled in her chest, "let it be known that I stand here of my own free will. I fled my father's household not in Dishonor but in search of a life where I might be valued for more than political alliance. I have found that life here, among Leif's people, where Norse and Saxon live together in peace." She turned to face her father directly. "You raised me to honor our traditions, father. One of those traditions states that a woman of age may choose her own husband if no formal betrothal has been completed with bride price paid and accepted. No such betrothal exists between me and Hakon's son. By our own laws, I am free to choose. Asgeir's face darkened with anger. You forget your place, daughter. The Jarl's decision, the law is the law, interrupted one of the older men among Asgeir's party, Ulf, his most trusted advisor and a keeper of the old traditions. The girl speaks truly of our customs, Jarl Asgeir. If no bride price was yet exchanged. Silence! Asgeir roared. This changes nothing. The home gang will proceed. Raghnild had expected no less. Her father's pride would not allow him to back down now, regardless of the law. But she had planted a seed of doubt among his own men, a reminder that his claim was based more on wounded pride than Norse tradition. As she moved back to the sidelines, she caught Leif's eye. He gave her the slightest of nods, acknowledging what she had done and drawing strength from it. Then, at a signal from Jarl Arvid, the home gang began. The two men circled each other warily, shields raised, swords at the ready. Asgeir struck first, a powerful overhead blow that Leif caught on his shield with a resounding crack. The older man followed with a series of swift attacks, clearly intending to overwhelm his younger opponent with sheer aggression. But Leif gave ground strategically, using Asgeir's momentum against him, conserving his strength while the older warrior expended his in furious assault. It was a tactic that required patience and discipline, qualities Raghnild had come to recognize as central to Leif's character. Stand and fight like a true Norse. Asgeir taunted as Leif continued his defensive strategy. Or has living among Saxons made you forget how to wield Norse steel? Leif did not rise to the bait. His expression remained focused, his movements economical, his defense impenetrable as Asgeir grew increasingly frustrated. The turning point came when Asgeir, breathing heavily now, overextended on a powerful thrust. Leif sidestepped with practiced grace and, for the first time, launched his own attack, a series of precise strikes that forced Asgeir back toward the edge of the fighting area. The older Jarl recovered, but something had changed in the dynamic between them. Leif had seized the initiative, and now it was Asgeir who found himself defending against an opponent whose skill clearly matched or exceeded his own. You fight well, Asgeir acknowledged grudgingly as their swords locked momentarily. Arvid taught his son properly, it seems. I fight for something worth fighting for, Leif replied, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd. Not for pride or possession, but for love and choice. With a roar of renewed fury, Asgeir broke the lock and launched another fierce attack. But his earlier exertions had taken their toll. His movements, though still powerful, had lost some of their precision. His breathing grew labored. Sweat dripped from beneath his helmet. And then it happened, a misstep on the hide-covered sand, a moment's loss of balance. Leif saw the opening and took it, not with a killing blow but with a precisely aimed strike that sent Asgeir's sword spinning from his hand and a shallow cut across the older man's forearm. First blood had been drawn. By the terms of the home gang, Leif had won. For a moment, the beach was silent save for the crash of waves and the heavy breathing of the two combatants. Asgeir stared at the blood welling from his arm, then at the young man who stood before him, sword still raised but making no move to press his advantage. Finish it, Asgeir growled, his pride clearly unwilling to accept defeat. The home gang is decided, Leif replied calmly. By our laws, by our traditions, Raghnild is free to choose her path. And she has chosen to stay here, to become my wife. And if I refuse to accept this outcome? Asgeir challenged, though several of his own men shifted uncomfortably at this disregard for tradition. Then you dishonor the very customs you claim to defend, came Jarl Arvid's voice as he stepped forward. The home gang has spoken the will of the gods, Asgeir. Will you defy them as well as our laws? A tense silence fell over the gathering as Asgeir visibly struggled with his pride. Finally, it was Raghnild who broke the impasse, stepping forward to stand beside Leif. "Father," she said, her voice gentle despite the firmness of her words, "you taught me that honor is the cornerstone of Norse life. That our word, once given, is sacred. That the outcome of Holmgang reveals the will of the gods themselves." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Will you now abandon those teachings because the gods have not favored your cause?" Something shifted in Asgeir's expression, a grudging recognition, perhaps, of the truth in his daughter's words. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeming to see for the first time the woman she had become rather than the daughter he had sought to control. "You have changed," he observed, his voice gruff but the rage gone from it. "I have found my place," she corrected. "As you always taught me a true Norse should do." After a long moment, Asgeir bent to retrieve his fallen sword, then sheathed it with deliberate care. "The Holmgang is decided," he acknowledged, the formal words clearly costing him effort. "Leif Arvidson has won the right to take Raghnild as his wife, if she so chooses." "I do choose him," Raghnild said clearly, taking Leif's free hand in hers. "With all my heart." Asgeir nodded once, sharply, then turned as if to leave. But Arvid's voice stopped him. "It is not our custom for a father to depart before his daughter's wedding," the older Jarl said. "Our settlement will celebrate their handfasting at the next full moon, 3 days hence. You and your men are welcome to stay and witness their joining." It was more than a courtesy, it was a peace offering, a chance for Asgeir to save face by acknowledging his daughter's choice with his presence rather than retreating in defeat. For a moment, it seemed he would refuse. Then, surprisingly, he gave a short nod. 3 days, he agreed. "We will remain to see them properly joined according to our ways." As the tension of the moment dissolved, Raghnild felt Leif's arm slip around her waist, pulling her close against his side. "Are you disappointed I didn't need your herbs for victory?" he murmured in her ear, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm only grateful I didn't need them to heal your wounds," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I suspect my father's pride suffers a deeper cut than his arm." "Pride heals," Leif said, watching as Arvid approached Asgeir with an offer of mead and medical attention. "And perhaps, in time, so might the breach between our families." Raghnild followed his gaze, watching in wonder as her father grudgingly accepted Arvid's hospitality. "The gods work in strange ways," she observed. "Perhaps this was their plan all along, not to curse me, but to guide me to where I might help bridge 2 worlds." "If so," Leif said, turning her to face him and touching his forehead to hers in a gesture of intimate connection, "then I thank them for their wisdom. For leading you to me, Raghnild Asgeirsdottir. My shield maiden. My healer. My heart." Around them, the 2 groups of Norse, settlers and raiders, new ways and old, began to cautiously mingle, sharing drink and comparing weapons in the time-honored tradition of warriors who have witnessed a worthy contest. The seeds of understanding, planted in the soil of respected tradition, had begun to take root. And on the shoreline where blood might have been spilled in hatred, a new future had been forged instead, one where love had proven stronger than pride, where choice had triumphed over control, where the curse Raghnild had feared had been revealed instead as the blessing that had guided her to where she truly belonged. 3 nights later, beneath the harvest moon, Leif and Raghnild joined their lives before both their peoples. Her father stood witness, his face still stern but something like reluctant acceptance in his eyes as he watched his daughter, radiant in a gown that blended Norse and Saxon designs, pledge herself to the man who had won her not through conquest but through respect and love. As they drank from the same cup, bound their hands with sacred cloth, and spoke the ancient vows in the Norse tongue, Raghnild felt the last shadow of her supposed curse dissolve like mist before the morning sun. In its place stood something far stronger, a love forged in the crucible of choice and challenge, blessed by both the old gods and the new, a bridge between worlds that had too long been divided. No curse could ever stand against this, Leif whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. The gathered community, Norse and Saxon, settler and raider, old ways and new, cheering their union under the watching stars. And Raghnild, once rejected by her own family, now embraced by a new one of her own making, knew with bone-deep certainty that he was right. What the gods had joined together, no curse, no pride, no ancient hatred could ever tear asunder. Their love, like the settlement they would one day lead together, stood as testament to a simple truth, that in the joining of apparent opposites, in the bridging of divided worlds, the greatest strength and truest honor could be found.